The blood-red sun sank behind the distant mesas as Abigail Owens stumbled down the dusty main street of Copper Creek, clutching her torn sleeve with trembling fingers, desperation etched across her face like a brand. Arizona Territory, 1876, was no place for a woman alone, especially one fleeing with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small leather pouch hidden in her boot containing her last $5, and a locket the only reminder of a mother long gone. Copper Creek had grown from a mining camp to a proper town over the past decade, boasting a general store, saloon, and even a small hotel where stage coaches stopped on their route between Tucson and Tombstone. The buildings cast long shadows across the hard-packed dirt as Abigail's gaze darted frantically between establishments, searching for sanctuary. Her honey-blonde hair had escaped its pins during her desperate flight, and dust coated her once fine blue dress. 3 days of hiding and traveling had left her exhausted, hungry, and terrified. Behind her, miles back, lay the ranch where she'd been staying with her uncle following her father's death 6 months earlier. What she'd thought would be a haven had become a prison when her uncle had arranged her marriage to Harold Benson, a cattle baron 30 years her senior with a reputation for cruelty and a chilling smile that never reached his eyes. "You'll marry him in 2 days' time," her uncle had declared last night. "The arrangements are final." She'd fled before dawn, taking nothing but what she could carry, knowing that Benson and his men would come after her. A woman of 22 who'd rejected such a powerful man would not simply be allowed to vanish. The saloon door swung open, spilling light and raucous laughter into the street. Abigail flinched, pressing herself against the wall of the general store as 3 men emerged, their voices carrying in the evening air. "Benson's offering $200 for the girl," one said, his words slurring slightly. "Said she's his fiancée and ran off." Described her pretty clear blonde, blue-eyed, traveling alone. "200's a lot of money," another replied. "I'll keep my eyes open, can't have gotten far on foot." Panic surged through Abigail's veins. Benson's influence reached even here. She needed help, needed somewhere to hide until she could figure out how to escape the territory entirely. Perhaps California, where she had a distant cousin, or even east to St. Louis where she might find work as a teacher. The men continued down the street, and Abigail slipped from her hiding place, moving toward the livery stable at the edge of town. If she could somehow acquire a horse. The stable was dim, lit only by a single lantern hanging from a beam. The smell of hay and horses filled her nostrils as she cautiously stepped inside. A tall figure stood with his back to her, brushing down a chestnut mare. Broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, he wore a dust-covered range coat and a weather-beaten hat. "Excuse me," Abigail whispered, her throat dry with fear. The man turned, and Abigail found herself looking into eyes the color of a summer storm, set in a face bronzed by sun and weathered by wind. A day's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and a small scar cut through his right eyebrow. Not handsome in the conventional sense, but striking, with a quiet intensity that made her breath catch. "Can I help you, madam?" His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that suggested Texas origins. Abigail hesitated, knowing her next words might determine her fate. She swallowed hard. "I need help." The cowboy set down his brush, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. He took in her disheveled appearance, the tear in her sleeve, the wild look in her eyes. "Trouble?" he asked simply. "Yes." Abigail glanced over her shoulder toward the stable entrance. "There are men looking for me. Bad men who want to take me back to someone I'm trying to escape." The cowboy's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a sharpening of attention. "They said you'd never help me," she said, desperation bleeding into her voice. "Everyone in town seems to know about the reward. They said a stranger would turn me in for the money." The cowboy smiled then, a slow, surprising transformation that softened his rugged features. "Then let's prove them all wrong." He moved with surprising speed for such a tall man, crossing to the stable door and peering out into the darkening street. Satisfied, he turned back to her. "Name's Dawson Flynn," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Most folks call me Flynn." "Abigail Owens," she replied, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time since she'd fled her uncle's ranch. "Miss Owens, I reckon you need somewhere to hide and a plan that gets you far from here." Flynn reached for a saddle hanging on the wall. "How do you feel about riding through the night?" "I'll do whatever it takes," Abigail said firmly. Flynn nodded as though her answer confirmed something for him. "I've got a campsite about 5 miles out of town. We'll head there first, then figure our next move come morning." "Why are you helping me?" Abigail couldn't help asking. "You don't know me." Flynn paused in saddling the chestnut mare. "Let's just say I've got my own reasons for not taking kindly to men who chase women against their will." His eyes darkened momentarily. "Besides, I've never much cared for Harold Benson's way of doing business." Abigail's eyes widened. "How did you know it was Benson, word travels, and a man offering $200 to retrieve a runaway fiancé isn't being subtle?" Flynn finished with the saddle and moved to a smaller bay horse. "Can you ride?" "Yes, my father taught me." "Good. That'll make things easier." He worked quickly, preparing both horses. "We need to move fast. Benson's men were asking questions in the saloon not an hour ago." Fear clutched at Abigail's heart again. "What if they come here?" "They already did," Flynn said grimly. "Fortunately, old Sam who runs this place is no friend to cattle barons. Told them he hadn't seen any young women today." He glanced at her torn sleeve. "Though we'd best get you something else to wear before we leave town. Those clothes are too recognizable." From a trunk near his saddle, Flynn pulled out a faded flannel shirt and a worn leather vest. "These'll have to do for now. You can change behind that stall. I'll keep watch." Abigail took the offered clothes and ducked behind the indicated stall. The shirt was enormous on her slender frame, but she rolled the sleeves and tucked it into her skirt. The vest helped give her some shape back. When she emerged, Flynn nodded approvingly. "Hat," he said, handing her a battered brown Stetson. "Tuck your hair up inside it. From a distance, you'll pass for a young man." She followed his instructions, feeling oddly transformed by the simple disguise. "Now we walk these horses out the back way, quiet like," Flynn instructed, his voice low. "Once we're clear of town, we'll ride hard for a spell." The next hour passed in tense silence as they led the horses through the back of the livery, down a narrow alley, and finally to the edge of town where scrubby desert began. Only when the lights of Copper Creek were small pinpricks in the distance did Flynn motion for them to mount. "Stay close," he said, swinging into his saddle with practiced ease. "The trail gets tricky in the dark." They rode in silence for nearly an hour, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a night bird. The stars emerged, brilliant against the black velvet of the sky, and a quarter moon provided just enough light to see the trail. Flynn led them off the main road, following what seemed to be a game trail that wound through mesquite and sagebrush. Abigail's body ached from tension and exertion, but she forced herself to stay alert, to keep pace with the cowboys' more experienced riding. Finally, they reached a small box canyon, invisible from the main trail. A creek bubbled along one side and the walls provided shelter from the wind. Flynn dismounted, helping Abigail down from her horse. "We should be safe here for the night," he said, his hands lingering briefly on her waist before he stepped back. "I've been using this spot for a few days. Nobody comes this way much. Are you on the run too?" Abigail asked, watching as he efficiently unloaded his saddlebags and began gathering wood for a small fire. Flynn's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Not exactly, just passing through. I do odd jobs, move on when it suits me." He struck a match, lighting the kindling. "Been working at the livery for about a week, earning enough to resupply before heading north." "Where are you going?" "Wyoming, maybe Montana," he shrugged. "Wherever there's honest work that pays." As the fire caught, casting a warm glow over the small camp, Abigail saw Flynn more clearly. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun rather than age. There was something watchful about him, alert but not unkind. "Are you hungry?" he asked, reaching for his saddlebag. Only then did Abigail realize she was starving. She hadn't eaten since morning a stolen biscuit from a clothesline where laundry hung to dry at the edge of town. "Yes," she admitted. Flynn produced jerky, dried apples, and a small loaf of bread. "Not fancy, but it'll keep you going." Abigail accepted the food gratefully. As she ate, Flynn settled across from her, the fire between them, his eyes occasionally scanning the darkness beyond their small circle of light. "You want to tell me what has Harold Benson so determined to get you back?" he asked finally. Abigail swallowed her bite of bread. "My uncle arranged our marriage without my knowledge or consent. Benson wants my father's land. It adjoins his ranch to the east. With me as his wife, he'd control it all." She stared into the flames. "My father died 6 months ago. I've been staying with my uncle while the estate was settled. I never imagined he would sell me like cattle." Flynn's expression hardened. "Your uncle sounds like a real prize." "He has gambling debts," Abigail said bitterly. "Benson offered to clear them in exchange for my hand." "And you ran last night, as soon as I overheard them finalizing the arrangement." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "The wedding was set for tomorrow." Flynn nodded slowly. "Benson's not a man accustomed to being defied. He'll keep looking." "I know." Fear fluttered in her chest again. "I need to get far away. California, perhaps. I have family there, a cousin in San Francisco." "California's a long way," Flynn remarked, feeding another stick into the fire. "But doable if we're careful. Stage to Tucson, then west from there." Abigail looked up, startled. Flynn met her gaze steadily. "I'm not in the habit of leaving a job half-finished, Miss Owens. If I aim to help you, I'll see it through." "But your plans? Wyoming?" He shrugged. "Wyoming will still be there next month. And I reckon I've made an enemy of Benson now anyway, helping you escape." His mouth quirked. "Might as well earn it properly." Gratitude washed through Abigail, along with something else, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "Thank you, Mr. Flynn." "Just Flynn," he corrected. "And you should get some sleep. We'll need to move at first light, before Benson's men start searching outside town." Flynn arranged his bedroll for her near the fire, then took his own blanket to the edge of the camp. As Abigail settled into the rough woolen blanket, exhaustion overtook her. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Flynn sitting against a boulder, his rifle across his knees, his eyes on the darkness beyond the canyon entrance. She dreamed of running, of harsh voices and pounding hooves, only to be awakened by Flynn's hand gently shaking her shoulder. "Dawn's coming," he said softly. "We should move." The sky was just beginning to lighten, a faint gray glow on the eastern horizon. Flynn had already packed most of their small camp and saddled the horses. He handed her a cup of coffee, strong and black. "Drink this. We've got a long ride ahead." Abigail sipped the bitter brew, grateful for its warmth. "Where are we headed?" "There's a small ranch about 20 miles west of here. Owner's name is MacGregor, Scottish fellow who keeps to himself. He owes me a favor and he's no friend of Benson's. We can rest there, maybe get you some proper traveling clothes." They set out as the first rays of sun crested the distant mountains, painting the desert in gold and rose. Flynn set a steady pace, occasionally glancing back to ensure Abigail was managing. The borrowed clothes and hat were uncomfortable, but Abigail found herself grateful for the disguise as they occasionally passed other travelers on the trail. By mid-morning, the sun beat down mercilessly. Flynn called a brief halt near a small water hole, allowing the horses to drink while they sheltered under a scrubby mesquite tree. "You ride well," he observed, passing her his canteen. "My father believed girls should learn practical skills." Abigail took a careful sip of the tepid water. "He taught me to ride, shoot, and keep accounts. My mother thought it scandalous, but he insisted." "Sounds like a sensible man." "He was." Grief colored her voice. "If he'd lived, none of this would have happened." Flynn studied her face. "What will you do in California, besides escape Benson?" Abigail hesitated. She'd been so focused on getting away, she'd given little thought to what would come after. "I have some education. Perhaps I could teach or work as a clerk in a shop. My cousin might help me find a position." Flynn nodded, though something in his expression suggested he had doubts. San Francisco was a rough city for a woman alone, even one with family connections. "We should keep moving," he said after a few minutes. "Still a long way to MacGregor's." They rode in companionable silence, the desert stretching endlessly around them. Occasionally, Flynn would point out landmarks or name the sparse desert plants they passed. His knowledge of the territory was impressive. "How long have you been in Arizona?" Abigail asked as they navigated a shallow wash, about 3 years off and on. Flynn adjusted his hat against the sun. "I was in Texas before that, and Kansas. Always moving," a shadow crossed his face. "It suits me." Something in his tone discouraged further questions, so Abigail fell silent again. Whatever ghosts Flynn carried, they were his own. It was late afternoon when they crested a small rise and saw the ranch in the valley below, a modest adobe house with a barn and corral, a windmill turning lazily above a water tank. Several cattle grazed in a fenced pasture, and smoke rose from the chimney. "MacGregor's place," Flynn announced. "Not much to look at, but it's solid." They approached slowly, and Flynn whistled a distinct pattern as they neared the house. A moment later, a man emerged onto the porch, rifle in hand. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a shock of red hair threaded with gray and a beard to match. "That you, Flynn?" the man called, his Scottish accent thick even at a distance. "It's me, Mac. Brought a friend who needs shelter." MacGregor lowered his rifle, watching as they rode into the yard. His bushy eyebrows rose when Abigail removed her hat, releasing her honey-blonde hair. "I see," he said, stroking his beard. "Well, dismount and come inside. Suppose there's a story here worth hearing." The interior of the adobe house was surprisingly comfortable, clean, and well-ordered, with sturdy furniture and colorful woven blankets on the walls. A woman emerged from the back room as they entered, her dark hair streaked with silver, her copper skin marking her native heritage. "Alina, we have guests," MacGregor said. "Flynn and—" "Abigail Owens," she supplied, extending her hand. Alina smiled warmly, taking Abigail's hand in both of hers. "You look exhausted, child, and those clothes." She glanced at Flynn with raised eyebrows. "A disguise," Flynn explained. "Miss Owens is being pursued." "Benson," MacGregor guessed immediately, his expression darkening. Flynn nodded. "He arranged to marry her tomorrow. She had other ideas." MacGregor barked a laugh. "Good for you, lass. That man's a curse on this territory." He gestured toward the kitchen table. "Sit. Alina's got stew on the fire, and you look like you could use a proper meal." As they ate the hearty venison stew, Flynn explained their situation and their need to reach California. MacGregor listened thoughtfully, occasionally exchanging glances with his wife. "The stage to Tucson runs through Miller's Crossing, about 15 miles south of here," he said finally. "Comes through every Wednesday and Sunday. Tomorrow's Wednesday." "Will they be watching the stage?" Alina asked, addressing Flynn. "Almost certainly," he confirmed. "Benson's not stupid. He'll have men at every stage stop between here and Tucson." MacGregor stroked his beard again. "There's another way. Freight wagon heading west day after tomorrow. Friend of mine, Joe Blackburn, makes the run to Yuma once a month with supplies. From Yuma, you could catch a steamer down the Colorado to the Gulf, then a ship to San Francisco." Flynn considered this. "Longer route, but less obvious. Benson might not think to watch the freight lines." "Joe's trustworthy," MacGregor added. "Fought with me against the Confederates. He'll help if I ask." The plan began to take shape over the remains of dinner. Abigail and Flynn would rest at the ranch tomorrow, then ride to meet Joe's wagon the following morning. With luck, they'd be in Yuma within a week and San Francisco within 3. "You'll need different clothes," Alina told Abigail. "I have some things that might fit, and supplies for the journey." After dinner, Alina showed Abigail to a small bedroom off the main living area. "You can wash here," she said, indicating a basin and pitcher. I'll find you something more suitable than men's clothes." Left alone, Abigail poured water into the basin and gratefully washed away the dust of the trail. Her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand startled her face sunburned, hair tangled, eyes shadowed with fatigue and anxiety. She barely recognized herself. A soft knock at the door announced Alina's return. She carried a bundle of clothing and a hairbrush. "These should fit," she said, laying out a simple blue skirt and white blouse. "And here proper underclothes too." "You're very kind," Abigail said. "I don't know how to thank you." Alina smiled, lines crinkling around her dark eyes. "No thanks needed. Any enemy of Benson's is a friend here." She paused, studying Abigail's face. "Flynn is a good man, complicated but good." "He saved me," Abigail said simply. "I'd likely be back at my uncle's by now if not for him." Alina's expression was knowing. "Rest now. Tomorrow will be time enough to talk more." When Alina had gone, Abigail changed into the borrowed nightgown and sank onto the narrow bed. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she thought about the journey ahead and the enigmatic cowboy who had risked himself to help her. Flynn had taken her trouble as his own without hesitation. Why? He'd mentioned having reasons for disliking men who pursued unwilling women, but there seemed to be more to it than that. There was a depth to him, a complexity behind those storm-gray eyes that intrigued her. Eventually, lulled by the unfamiliar sounds of the desert night, Abigail drifted into a dreamless sleep. Morning brought the scent of coffee and bacon. Abigail dressed in Alina's borrowed clothes. The simple skirt and blouse fit well enough, though Alina was shorter and more broadly built. She brushed her hair and pinned it simply at her nape, then ventured into the kitchen. Flynn sat at the table with MacGregor, both men studying a map spread between them. He glanced up as she entered, and something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, at seeing her in women's clothes again. "Good morning," she said, suddenly shy under his steady gaze. "Miss Owens," he acknowledged, rising slightly. "You look rested." Alina appeared from the back door, a basket of eggs in her arms. "Ah, the clothes fit well enough. Come eat, we have plans to discuss." Over breakfast, MacGregor detailed the route Joe's wagon would take west to Yuma. "It's not the main road," he explained. "Joe prefers the southern trail. Less traffic, and the Mexican traders he deals with are just across the border. More dangerous, though," Flynn noted. "Apache territory." MacGregor shrugged. "Joe trades fairly with the tribes. They leave him be, mostly." "Mostly," Flynn repeated dryly. Abigail listened to their discussion with growing anxiety. The journey sounded increasingly perilous. Hostile Indians, the harsh desert, not to mention Benson's men who would surely still be searching. Yet what choice did she have? After breakfast, MacGregor went to tend his cattle, and Alina began preparing food for the journey ahead. Flynn gestured for Abigail to join him on the porch, where the morning sun hadn't yet reached the temperature of a forge. "You're worried," he observed, leaning against the porch railing. Abigail didn't deny it. "It sounds challenging." Flynn's mouth quirked. "That's one word for it." He studied the distant mountains for a moment. "You could stay here. MacGregor and Alina would keep you safe until things cool down." "And then what? Return to my uncle, marry someone else of his choosing?" She shook her head firmly. "No, I need to make my own way now." Flynn nodded as though he'd expected this answer. "California it is, then." "You don't have to come," Abigail said suddenly. "You've done more than enough already. I could travel with this Joe person." "I told you I finish what I start." Flynn's voice was quiet but firm. "Besides, I've never seen the Pacific Ocean. Might be worth the trip." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. For a moment, Abigail found it hard to breathe. The spell was broken by the sound of approaching horses. Flynn tensed immediately, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip as he stepped in front of Abigail. MacGregor appeared from the barn, rifle in hand, moving with surprising speed for his size. He positioned himself near the corner of the house, partially concealed. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the morning sky. They paused, surveying the ranch below, then began their descent toward the house. "Get inside," Flynn told Abigail, his voice low and urgent. She hesitated. "Who is it?" "Don't know yet, but we're not taking chances." Abigail retreated into the house, but remained near the window where she could see and hear. Alina appeared beside her, a shotgun held comfortably in her weathered hands. "Just in case," the older woman said calmly. Outside, Flynn had moved to stand beside MacGregor as the riders approached. As they drew closer, Abigail could see that they wore the distinctive leather vests of Benson's ranch hands. "Morning, gentlemen," Flynn called, his posture relaxed but alert. "Something we can help you with." The lead rider, a man with a pockmarked face and cold eyes, reined his horse to a stop a few yards from the porch. "Looking for a woman," he said without preamble. "Young, blonde, ran away from her rightful fiancé. Mr. Benson's offering a reward." "Haven't seen any women on the road," MacGregor replied, his Scottish burr more pronounced. "Just my wife here, and she's neither young nor blonde." The rider's eyes narrowed. "Mind if we look around? Mr. Benson would appreciate your cooperation." "I mind very much," MacGregor said pleasantly, though his rifle remained ready. "This is private property. Unless you have a warrant from the territorial marshal, I suggest you continue your search elsewhere." The tension stretched between them, thick as molasses. The riders' companions shifted uneasily in their saddles. "Don't reckon I know you," the leader said to Flynn, ignoring MacGregor. "You work here." "Just passing through," Flynn answered evenly. "Doing some repairs for Mr. MacGregor in exchange for a meal." The man's eyes flickered to Flynn's chestnut mare, visible in MacGregor's corral. Recognition dawned. "That's the livery horse from Copper Creek. Old Sam said a drifter had been working there." Flynn didn't respond, but his stance changed subtly, weight shifting to the balls of his feet. "Interesting coincidence," the rider continued. "Horse goes missing the same night as the girl." "I paid for that horse fair and square," Flynn said. "Got a bill of sale in my saddlebag if you're interested." The rider's hand drifted toward his pistol. "Maybe we should continue this conversation in town. Sheriff might be interested in a drifter with a convenient story." "Or maybe," MacGregor interjected, his rifle now raised slightly, "you boys should ride on before this gets unfriendly." A tense silence followed. From her position at the window, Abigail could see the calculation in the lead rider's eyes as he assessed his chances against 2 armed men, one of whom had the advantage of higher ground on the porch. "We'll be back," he finally said, "with more men." "Mr. Benson doesn't take kindly to those who interfere in his business." "Neither do I," MacGregor replied steadily. With a final glare, the rider wheeled his horse around. His companions followed, and soon the 3 were galloping back toward the ridge. Only when they had disappeared from sight did Flynn's posture relax slightly. He exchanged a look with MacGregor. "They'll be back," the Scotsman said grimly. Flynn nodded. "And with more men, we need to move up our timeline, tonight, not tomorrow." Alina had already begun packing supplies when they re-entered the house, her expression determined. "I heard," she said. "Joe's camp is about 10 miles southwest near Coyote Wash. If you leave at dusk, you can reach him by midnight." Abigail felt numb with fear. The confrontation had brought home the reality of her situation in a way that even her flight from her uncle's hadn't. Men with guns were hunting her. This wasn't some girlish adventure, it was deadly serious. Flynn seemed to read her thoughts. "We still have options," he said quietly. "But we need to decide quickly." "I'm not going back," Abigail said, finding her voice. "Whatever happens, I can't marry that man." Flynn studied her face, then nodded once. "Then we leave at dusk." The rest of the day passed in tense preparation. MacGregor rode out to scout the surrounding area, returning mid-afternoon with news that Benson's men had established a camp about 3 miles east with at least 6 riders. "They're watching the main road," he reported, "but I don't think they know about the southern trail to Joe's camp." Alina packed food, canteens, and medical supplies. She also provided Abigail with a small Derringer pistol, showing her how to load and fire it. "Last resort," she instructed, "but better to have it and not need it." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Flynn carefully checked both horses, tightening girths and examining shoes. He'd replaced his usual range coat with a darker one from MacGregor's stores, and wore 2 pistols now instead of 1. Abigail had changed back into men's clothes for the journey: pants, shirt, and a dark vest, with her hair tucked firmly under a hat. The disguise would help in the darkness, Flynn had explained. "Ready?" he asked quietly as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the eastern sky. Abigail nodded, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Flynn helped her mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Stay close," he murmured. "If there's trouble, follow my lead." MacGregor and Alina stood in the yard to see them off, faces solemn in the gathering dusk. "Godspeed," MacGregor said. "Joe will be expecting you. Tell him Angus sent you." "Thank you," Abigail said, her throat tight with emotion. "For everything?" Alina reached up to squeeze her hand. "Be safe, child." "And you," she fixed Flynn with a stern look, "bring her back someday when this is over. I want to hear how the story ends." Flynn touched his hat brim. "Yes, madam." They rode out as the last light faded from the sky, keeping to the shadows of a dry wash that ran behind the ranch. Flynn led the way, setting a cautious pace until they were well clear of the buildings, then urging their mounts to a ground-eating lope. The night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant overhead. They rode in silence, Flynn occasionally raising his hand to signal a change in direction or pace. Abigail focused on following, pushing away thoughts of pursuit, of capture, of the unknown dangers ahead. After what seemed like hours, Flynn reined his horse to a walk. "We need to rest the horses," he said, his voice low. "There's a small spring ahead." They dismounted in a shallow ravine where a trickle of water emerged from the rocks. While the horses drank, Abigail stretched her aching legs. Despite her experience riding, the pace and tension had left her muscles protesting. Flynn moved like a shadow, checking their back trail before returning to her side. "So far, so good," he murmured. "No sign of pursuit. We'll reach Joe's camp in about an hour if we keep up this pace." "Flynn," Abigail began, then hesitated. "What is it?" His face was mostly in shadow, but she could feel his attention. "Why are you doing this, truly? You're risking so much for a stranger." He was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, with an undercurrent of old pain. "My sister," he said simply. "She was forced to marry a man much like Benson when she was just 17. Our father arranged it, thought he was securing her future with a wealthy rancher." His hand tightened on his saddle horn. "The man beat her, regularly. When she tried to leave him, he tracked her down and—" He stopped abruptly. "I'm sorry," Abigail whispered, understanding now. "It was a long time ago, but when I saw you in that stable, running from a similar fate." He shrugged, the gesture visible even in the darkness. "Some wrongs you can't right, but maybe you can prevent them from happening again." Impulsively, Abigail reached out, finding his hand in the darkness. She squeezed it gently, feeling the roughness of calluses against her palm. "Thank you." His fingers tightened around hers briefly before he pulled away. "We should keep moving." They mounted again, continuing southwest through increasingly rugged terrain. The moon rose, casting silver light across the desert landscape. Flynn seemed to navigate by some internal compass, rarely hesitating at junctions in the trail. It was nearing midnight when they spotted the glow of a campfire in the distance. Flynn signaled for a halt, studying the light. "Should be Joe's camp," he said softly, "but we approach carefully." "Wait here." Before Abigail could protest, he had dismounted and disappeared into the darkness, moving silently despite his size. She waited, tense, her hand on the Derringer in her pocket. Minutes stretched endlessly. Then Flynn reappeared as quietly as he'd gone, materializing beside her horse. "It's Joe," he confirmed. "Camp looks secure. Come on." The camp was nestled in a small valley protected by steep cliffs on 3 sides. A large freight wagon stood near the center with 4 mules picketed nearby. A man sat by the fire, rifle across his knees, alert despite the late hour. "Ho the camp," Flynn called as they approached. "Angus MacGregor sent us." The man stood, a tall, lean figure with a shock of white hair. "About time," he called back. "MacGregor's message said you'd be coming tomorrow." "Plans changed," Flynn replied, helping Abigail dismount. "Benson's men are closer than we'd like." Joe Blackburn studied them both in the firelight, his weathered face impassive. "So you're the girl Benson's after," he said to Abigail. "Heard he's offering quite a reward." Abigail tensed, but Flynn remained relaxed beside her. "MacGregor said we could trust you," he remarked, his tone casual though his posture suggested readiness. Joe snorted. "Angus knows better than to question my word. If I say I'll help, I'll help. I just like knowing what I'm getting into." He gestured to the fire. "Sit. Coffee's hot and there's stew left." As they ate, Flynn explained their situation. Joe listened without interruption, occasionally nodding. "Freight runs to Yuma take about 5 days," he said when Flynn had finished. "Not comfortable travel, but safer than the stage with Benson's men watching. From Yuma, you can catch Jenkins' steamer down to the Gulf." He eyed Abigail. "Won't be easy, desert's harsh this time of year." "I can manage," she said firmly. Joe's mouth twitched in what might have been approval. "We leave at dawn, try to get some sleep, tomorrow's a long day." Flynn spread his bedroll near the wagon, insisting Abigail take it while he kept watch. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully, her dreams haunted by pursuing riders and the memory of Flynn's hand holding hers in the darkness. She awoke to the scent of coffee and bacon. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, gray giving way to pink. Joe was already harnessing the mules to his wagon while Flynn saddled their horses. "Change of plans," Flynn told her as she approached. "Joe thinks we should split up. I'll ride ahead as a decoy, make it look like we're heading for Tucson. You'll travel with the wagon." Alarm shot through her. "Alone." "But Joe's trustworthy," Flynn assured her, "and this gives us better odds. If Benson's men are watching the trails, they'll follow me, not a freight wagon." "When will I see you again?" The question slipped out before she could consider its implications. Flynn's eyes softened slightly. "Yuma, I'll meet you there. Joe knows where." He hesitated, then added, "If I'm not there within 2 days of your arrival, don't wait. Take the steamer to California." The thought of continuing without him made her stomach twist with anxiety. In just 2 days, Flynn had become her anchor in a world turned upside down. "I'd rather we stayed together," she admitted. "So would I." The simple statement hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. "But this gives you the best chance." Joe approached, breaking the moment. "Ready when you are," he told Abigail. "You'll ride in the wagon. I've made a space among the cargo where you can hide if needed." Reluctantly, Abigail climbed into the wagon, settling into the small space Joe had arranged among crates and barrels. Flynn handed up her few belongings, his fingers brushing hers. "Be careful," she said softly. "Always am." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "See you in Yuma." With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, a solitary figure against the lightening sky. Abigail watched until he disappeared beyond a ridge. "He knows what he's doing," Joe said, climbing onto the wagon seat. "Best tracker and rider I've seen in years." "How do you know him?" Abigail asked, still staring at the empty horizon. "Don't really know his reputation, and I trust Angus MacGregor's judgment." Joe clicked to the mules, and the wagon lurched forward. "Flynn's the kind of man you want on your side in trouble." The journey that followed was grueling. The freight wagon moved at a plodding pace compared to horseback, and the terrain grew increasingly rugged as they headed west. Joe kept to little-used trails, sometimes following dry washes that barely qualified as paths. The heat was oppressive, the sun beating down mercilessly from dawn to dusk. Abigail's fair skin burned despite the hat she wore and the canopy Joe rigged over part of the wagon. Dust coated everything: clothes, skin, hair, even the food they ate. Joe was taciturn but kind in his gruff way, sharing stories of his years as a freighter to pass the time. He'd been everywhere, it seemed California, Mexico, even as far north as Canada. Why this life? Abigail asked on the third day as they made camp near a brackish water hole. Always moving, never settling, Joe considered the question as he built a small fire. Freedom, he said finally. Out here, a man answers to himself and no one else. No bosses, no expectations except the ones you set. He glanced at her. Not so different from what you're seeking, I reckon. Abigail nodded slowly. She'd never thought of it that way, but Joe was right. She was running toward freedom as much as she was running from Benson. What will you do in California? Joe asked, echoing Flynn's earlier question. I'm not sure anymore, she admitted. I thought I'd stay with my cousin, perhaps teach school, but now. She stared into the small fire. I want more than just escape. I want to build something of my own. Joe nodded approvingly. Good. Too many people run without knowing what they're running toward. They reached Yuma on the afternoon of the 5th day. The town sprawled along the Colorado River, a bustling outpost where Arizona Territory met California. After the isolation of the desert journey, the crowds and noise were almost overwhelming. Joe guided the wagon to a small hotel near the riverfront. Flynn said to meet him here, he explained, helping Abigail down. Jenkins' steamer leaves day after tomorrow, should give Flynn time to reach town. The hotel was modest but clean. The proprietor, a stout woman named Mrs. Gilmore, showed Abigail to a small room overlooking the river. After weeks of travel, the simple amenities, a real bed, clean water, privacy seemed like unimaginable luxuries. Your husband will be joining you, Mrs. Gilmore asked as she prepared to leave. Abigail hesitated only briefly. Yes, he's arriving tomorrow or the next day. The lie was easier than explaining and offered some protection. A woman traveling with her husband attracted far less attention than one traveling alone. After bathing and changing into clean clothes Alina had provided, Abigail ventured downstairs to the small dining room. Joe had already departed, continuing his freight run to settlements along the river, but not before extracting a promise that she would wait for Flynn before boarding the steamer. She ate a simple meal, aware of curious glances from other diners. A young woman dining alone was unusual enough to attract notice, even in a frontier town like Yuma. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact, and returned to her room as soon as she'd finished. From her window, she watched the river traffic steamers, barges, small fishing boats, and the bustle of the town beyond. Somewhere out there, Flynn was making his way toward her, or so she hoped. The alternative that he'd been caught by Benson's men, or worse, was too painful to contemplate. The first day passed slowly. Abigail remained in her room, venturing out only for meals. She purchased a newspaper and searched it anxiously for any mention of Benson or a manhunt, but found nothing. By the second day, anxiety had her pacing the small room. The steamer would depart the following morning, if Flynn didn't arrive today. Late afternoon brought a commotion in the street below her window. Looking out, Abigail saw a rider dismounting from a lathered horse. Even from above, she recognized the broad shoulders and distinctive hat, Flynn. Heart-pounding, she rushed downstairs, nearly colliding with Mrs. Gilmore in the narrow hallway. Your husband's arrived, the proprietor announced with satisfaction. Though he looks like he's had a rough journey. Abigail pushed past her, hurrying to the hotel entrance. Flynn stood in the lobby, dust-covered and unshaven, a smear of what looked like dried blood on his sleeve. He looked up as she appeared, and the relief in his eyes mirrored her own. You made it, she breathed. Told you I would. His voice was hoarse with exhaustion. Mrs. Gilmore bustled up behind Abigail. Room's all ready, Mr. Owens, and I'll send up hot water for bathing right away. Flynn raised an eyebrow at the name but didn't contradict her. Much obliged, madam. As they climbed the stairs to her room, Abigail noticed Flynn favoring his left leg slightly. You're hurt, she said quietly. It's nothing. Small disagreement with some rocks when my horse stumbled. He attempted a reassuring smile that didn't quite succeed. Had to take some rough country to avoid Benson's men. In the privacy of the room, Flynn sank onto the single chair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. Abigail poured water from the pitcher into the basin and brought him a clean cloth. "Let me see," she insisted, gesturing to his arm. Too tired to argue, Flynn rolled up his sleeve, revealing a long gash along his forearm, clumsily bandaged with a neckerchief. "This needs cleaning," Abigail said, keeping her voice steady despite the surge of concern. She gently removed the makeshift bandage, wincing at the angry red of the wound beneath. "Told you, it's nothing," Flynn muttered, but he submitted to her ministrations as she carefully washed away dried blood and dirt. "What happened?" she asked, working methodically. "With Benson's men." Flynn sighed. "Led them north toward Tucson for 2 days. They followed, just as planned, lost them in the mountains, then circled back west." His mouth quirked. "They're probably still searching the trails to Tucson." A knock at the door announced the arrival of hot water. While Flynn bathed and changed into clean clothes from his saddlebag, Abigail ordered food from the hotel kitchen. They ate in companionable silence, both too exhausted for conversation. "Steamer leaves in the morning," Flynn said finally, setting down his coffee cup. "Jenkins is a good captain. Keeps a clean boat. You'll be in San Francisco within 2 weeks." Abigail looked up sharply. "We'll be in San Francisco," she corrected. Flynn's expression was unreadable. "Abigail." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening chill. "You're not coming," she realized, her chest tightening. "I can't," he said simply. "Benson's not going to stop looking. He's a proud man, and you've wounded that pride. As long as I'm with you, you're in danger. So you're just going to leave me?" The hurt in her voice surprised even her. Flynn's eyes softened. "No, I'm going to make sure you're safe. The captain has instructions to look out for you. Your cousin will meet you at the dock in San Francisco." "You contacted my cousin?" He nodded. "Sent a telegram from a town east of here. She's expecting you." Abigail stared at him, torn between gratitude and a deep sense of loss. "And what will you do?" "Head north like I planned. Wyoming, Montana." He hesitated. "Unless." "Unless what?" Flynn stood, moving to the window to stare out at the darkening sky. "Unless you'd consider another option." Abigail waited, her heart beating so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "There's land available in Northern California," Flynn said, still facing the window. "Good land near the Oregon border, far from Benson's reach or influence." He turned to face her. "I have some savings, enough to buy a small spread, start a ranch. You'd settle down?" Abigail asked, scarcely believing what she was hearing, for the right reasons. His gaze held hers steadily. "With the right person." The implication hung between them, momentous as a thunderclap. Abigail rose from her chair, moving to stand before him. "Flynn, I know it's sudden," he said quickly. "We've only known each other a week, but sometimes—" He reached out, tentatively touching her cheek. "Sometimes you just know." The warmth of his calloused fingers against her skin sent heat cascading through her. "Know what?" she whispered. "That you've found something worth stopping for." In that moment, looking into his storm-gray eyes, Abigail understood what he meant. The connection between them had been immediate, unexpected, and profound. In helping her escape one future, Flynn had inadvertently opened the door to another one she hadn't known she wanted until this moment. "Yes," she said simply. Flynn blinked, as though he hadn't expected agreement so readily. "Yes." Abigail smiled, covering his hand with hers where it rested against her cheek. "Yes, I'd consider that option, very seriously." The transformation of his face was remarkable surprise giving way to hope, then to a joy that erased the weariness of the trail. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Flynn lowered his head until his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. Abigail answered by sliding her arms around his neck, drawing him closer. His arms encircled her waist, strong and secure, as the kiss deepened into something that felt remarkably like coming home after a long journey. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected this," he admitted. "When I helped you in that stable, I thought I was just doing the right thing." "You were," Abigail murmured, "and somehow it became the right thing for both of us." They spent the evening planning. Instead of the steamer to San Francisco, they would take a smaller boat upriver, then travel overland to the Northern Territories. Flynn knew people along the way who could offer shelter and guidance. By spring, they could reach the land he'd spoken of, begin building a home. "It won't be easy," he warned. "Frontier life is hard, especially at first." Abigail thought of her comfortable childhood home, the life of relative ease she'd known before her father's death. Then she remembered the feeling of being treated as property, to be bartered and traded at her uncle's whim. "I don't want easy," she said firmly. "I want freedom and a chance to build something that's truly mine." She met his gaze. "Ours." Flynn smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Then that's what we'll do." They were married the next morning by a frontier preacher who asked few questions beyond their names and whether they had the $2 fee. Flynn used his real name Dawson Flynn, and Abigail became Mrs. Flynn, with a sense of rightness that surprised her. Their journey north began that same day, traveling by riverboat up the Colorado. As Yuma receded behind them, Abigail stood at the rail, Flynn's arm around her waist. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly, noticing her pensive expression. She shook her head. "No, just thinking about what you said that first night about proving them all wrong." Flynn smiled, drawing her closer. "I'd say we've made a good start." "Yes," Abigail agreed, leaning into his solid strength. "A very good start indeed." The years that followed were not easy, but they were fulfilling in ways Abigail could never have imagined during those desperate days of flight. They established their ranch in a valley nestled among pine-covered hills, building first a small cabin, then gradually expanding as their fortunes improved. Flynn proved to be a skilled rancher, his years of drifting having taught him much about cattle and horses. Abigail learned quickly, her determination making up for her lack of experience. Together, they built a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. News reached them occasionally of events back in Arizona. Benson had indeed searched for months, his pride unable to accept Abigail's rejection. Eventually, the territory's changing politics and a severe drought that decimated his herds forced him to abandon the search. 3 years after their arrival in Northern California, Abigail gave birth to their first child, a daughter with her mother's honey blonde hair and her father's storm gray eyes. 2 sons followed in subsequent years, filling their expanded home with laughter and activity. On the evening of their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their substantial ranch house watching the sunset paint the western sky in gold and crimson, Flynn took Abigail's hand in his. "Regrets?" he asked, a question he posed every year on this day. And as she did every year, Abigail shook her head, smiling at the man who had risked everything to help a desperate stranger and found love in the process. "Not one," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "They said you'd never help me." "You proved them wrong in ways I never could have imagined." Flynn's arm tightened around her as their children's laughter drifted from inside the house. "Best decision I ever made," he said softly, "proving them all wrong together." And as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that their story, begun in desperation and danger, had found its perfect ending in this peaceful valley so far from where they'd started. Not an ending, she corrected herself as Flynn's lips found hers in a kiss as sweet as their first. A beginning that renewed itself with each passing day, proving again and again that sometimes the greatest journeys start with a simple act of kindness and the courage to prove everyone wrong.